Alice, for organizing. So hello, everyone. My name is Claire Gillison-Duval. I'm the Director of Corporate Social Responsibility for the Europe, Middle East, Africa region at SAP. And I have the absolute pleasure of hosting this Africa Code Week webinar with esteemed guests. Just for your information, this webinar is also streamed live on the Africa Code Week Facebook page. But with no further ado, please allow me to hand over and first to welcome Mr. Chu Qing, Deputy Director General at UNESCO, for the opening address. So Mr. Chu Qing, over to you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be with you today for the launch of the 2020 edition of the Africa Code Week. This year, these events are taking place in an unprecedented context, the COVID-19 pandemic. As the virus spread around the world, it affected all aspects of our societies. Distance learning became the norm for many students. Museums moved exhibition online, and natural heritage sites hosted virtual visits. If this shift has taught us one thing, it is that digital skills are essential. Yet, around the globe, less than 30% of people master standard ICT skills, and this figure drops to just over 10% in least developed countries. This situation is amplified by the gender divide. Women and girls are 25% less likely than men to know how to use digital technology for basic purposes, according to UNESCO's flagship publication, I'd Blush If I Could. When it comes to programming, only 7% of adults have the necessary skills in high-income countries, and just 3% of adults in middle-income countries. These digital divides are not only problematic from the economic and technological perspectives, they also threaten the social contract itself. For example, when false information abounds on the internet. This makes our commitment to media and information literacy all the more important, especially as we prepare to celebrate the 2020 edition of Media and Information Literacy Week. Giving individuals the skills to navigate this digital environment, governed by programs and algorithms, is also the goal of Africa Code Week. This is why we are gathered here today. This week was launched by the software company SAP in 2015, with the goal of bridging the digital skills gap in Africa. By taking part in short workshops, girls and boys learn the basics of programming using free available Scratch software, initially targeting 20,000 children aged between 8 and 24 in 11 African countries. This initiative has grown significantly over the past 5 years, and UNESCO has contributed to its dynamic. UNESCO joined forces with Africa Code Week in 2016 through the Youth Mobile Initiative. Both projects defined a common cause. They aim to empower African youth by equipping them with the digital skills they need to forge tomorrow's world. Building on UNESCO's network of field offices and the efforts of more than 130 partners, the event now mobilizes thousands of volunteers, teachers, and schools each year. It has been deployed in nearly 40 countries. reaching millions of young people and teachers who would normally not have the possibility to learn digital skills. For many of these individuals, computer language has become a new form of creativity and expression, and a means to develop media and information literacy. In 2019, Africa Code Week reached 3.85 million youth, 40% of whom were girls, through thousands of workshops. In 2020, we are aiming at even more ambitious achievements. Indeed, while COVID-19 is creating challenges for our event, it is also offering opportunities. Because of the health crisis, this year's Code Week is taking place entirely online. As a result, the event covers all 54 countries on the African continent. This scope is reflected in the resources that have been developed, which include a virtual teacher training model and a mobile application. A coding challenge has also been launched to give young people the opportunity to develop technology they could change the future of education. As we look to build a new normal for the world after COVID-19, Africa Code Week shows that we can achieve what we can achieve when we draw on all the resources at our disposal. The most important of these resources is people, young people, teachers, and partners. Today, as we celebrate the World Teachers' Day, I would like to express our warmest gratitude to the teachers that make Africa Code Week possible every year. As the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly added to the challenges faced by education systems throughout the world, we must work with them to protect the right to education and build better in the post-pandemic era. First and foremost, this means teaching them on digital skills and remote learning. Although education would be meaningless without schools or teachers, digital technologies are playing an increasingly important role. We owe it to teachers to acknowledge this fact. In closing, I would like to thank all those who have contributed to the success of this event. Our initiative would be impossible without strong partnerships between the public, private, and non-profit sectors. Lastly, I wish to thank our partner SAP for its ongoing commitment to this essential initiative. We all know that digital skills are no longer an option. They are a necessity. It is up to us to join forces and make digital skills available to everyone, coding our way towards a sustainable future. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Merci infiniment. Many thanks, Mr. Tuchin, for your very inspiring opening address. And please allow me to say that the Africa Code Week family is absolutely thrilled to benefiting from the UNESCO support since the very first day.
Thank you.
So, as Mr. Tuchin said, welcome everyone to the launch ceremony of the 2020 edition of Africa Code Week. SDG number 17 is one of the pillars of Africa Code Week, and might I add, of our mission in SAP Corporate Social Responsibility. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development says achieving SDGs will require between $5 and $7 trillion in annual investment. And this figure shows how crucial it is to mutualize not only strengths, but also resources in both the public and private sectors. Africa Code Week's very conception is the result of a brainstorming that happened some years ago, 5 years ago, between corporation entity representatives and public education professionals like Bernard Kirk, who's the CEO of the Camden Education Trust, highlighting once again the power of partnership, even at an early stage. Then many more partners came on board, from historical international institutions like UNESCO to government-led organizations like Irish Aid, GIZ, BMZ, or ADEA. And we count today 130 organizations supporting Africa Code Week. And it is my absolute honor today to gather our esteemed partners to discuss how collaboration can determine outcomes and achievements of educational initiatives in general, and in Africa Code Week in particular. So please allow me to introduce our speakers for this panel. Honorable Albert Senjumva, Executive Secretary of the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, former member of cabinet in the Rwandan government from 2011 until 2015. Honorable Kieran Cannon, Member of Parliament representing Galway East in Ireland, former Minister of State in Education and Foreign Affairs. Minister Cannon did us the honor to launch Africa Code Week for us in Tanzania in 2017, and we are very grateful for his support. And may I congratulate you, sir, for your recent nomination as the spokesperson for media, arts and culture for the Fine Gael party, for a member of the governing coalition in Ireland. And last, but definitely not least, my esteemed colleague, Kathy Smith, who's the SAP Africa first female managing director. So, dear Albert, if you agree, let's start our conversation with you. And I would ask you 2 questions. So let's start with the first one. So at ADEA, which is the Association pour le développement de l'éducation en Afrique, what is your definition? And ideally, if we could have a real life example of a successful PPP. And for everyone, just as a reminder, PPP is the acronym, and at SAP, I have to say, we really like acronyms. So PPP is a public-private partnership.
Thank you, Claire. If you allow me, I will start by commending the SAP for this novel initiative known as the Africa Code Week. And I'm saying this because I'm looking at my background as a former IT manager at a university in the early 2000s, where the main issue around the continent was around the skills gap in the IT system, from networking, programming, and so on and so forth. So I'm happy really to see such a great investment that SAP is putting, particularly in the African continent, focusing on the youth and the kids in particular. So this is so important. I cannot find probably the right way of defining PPP than just to show the success that PPP are making to the continent. I will take a simple example around this time of COVID. As you know, at some point, country decided to close the schools. And everyone was wondering what was going to happen, because you can imagine having kids at home without any occupation would have been really catastrophic. So one of these PPP that actually can be taken as a successful achievement was telecom companies allowing schools, education, to access online materials using what they call zero-rated services. So I have seen this happening in countries like Morocco, happening in countries like Rwanda, where telecoms, beyond the profit-making approach that they have, they found themselves playing a very important role as a social responsibility To me, that's really a good success story that we need to keep beyond even this COVID time when we move into what we call the new normal. So a PPP to me has to be a win-win or approach. It's so important. We all understand the need for companies to make profit, but company needs also to understand their role as they engage with the society, as they engage with countries, in particular the education sector. Education is so critical. We can't expect any development to happen without fixing education. That's what we aim, the aim of the SDG. And we all know the SDG is so important and articulate particularly the role of PPP. And that's why I was very much interested to join this gathering as the Executive Secretary of ADEA. We are making our efforts to make sure that we bring into our programs, our initiatives, the private sector, because we believe very much of the role they can play to raise the quality and relevance of education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And may I also thank you for having agreed to be the Africa Code Week 2020 patron this year. It was a real honor for
my
the
pleasure.
entire Africa
My
Code
pleasure
Week.
and honor.
Merci.
Yes, thanks a lot.
So Albert, actually, I have a second question for you. How can we foster more PPP-based initiatives to bridge the digital gender gap?
This was also an interesting question. Of course, there are many ways of doing this. The first and most important thing is to make sure that there are coordinated PPP policy actions that can help to narrow the digital gender gap. Of course, this requires raising awareness and tackling gender stereotypes, enabling enhanced, safer, and more affordable access to digital tools, and stronger, of course, cooperation across the stakeholders to remove barriers to girls and women's full participation in digital world. Of course, we all see with the digitalizations, and particularly the fourth industrial revolution, that digital technologies are providing new opportunity to make progress for technological fix, because technological fix cannot be addressed by addressing structural problems that drive the digital gender divide. So we definitely need concrete policy actions to start with, that we have to foster women and girls and their full participation and inclusion in the digital economy. So bridging the gender divide also in the digital world can provide new sources of global economic growth. I think this is really so important for particularly the private investment to understand, as far as market is concerned, by allowing girls and women to use and access technology, that will definitely boost economies and help the growth to happen. Of course, this also linked to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development goals. So, in brief, I think we need a concerted effort for not only the private, but also for the civil society from public to make sure that actually the PPP help to bridge the gap, which is so high, as my predecessor was pointing out in the data currently available. And this is particular in Africa. But I can tell you, looking at how things, the current trends, things are happening. We're seeing more and more girls moving into digital technologies. I have even saw some good innovations in the use of technology in businesses that are actually driven by women. We see more women engaging into businesses where they apply technologies. I think that's really a good start, but we definitely need consolidated efforts from different parties involved to make sure this can sustain, expand over time. Thank you.
Merci, Honorable Albert, for your insights on the topic. So I will now move on with Kieran Cannon. So Honorable Kieran, from a government perspective, So what would be the key aspects of a PPP in Africa?
Okay, thank you, Claire, and thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to everybody tuning in. From a government's perspective, in terms of our development work internationally, and particularly in Africa, partnering with businesses can offer a really cost-effective way to achieve our development goals at its most simple. For example, development agencies can often lack capable implementing partners, while the private sector already has that capacity. It is that outreach, and SAP being a perfect example, and may be able also to co-finance shared initiatives in partnership. The private sector, as we all know, relies hugely on innovation. In fact, without innovation, it can't survive. And if you look at SAP's Innovation Factory, for example, you can see an approach to innovation that focuses less on the academic aspects of innovation, but actually focuses on problem solving, on solving real world problems using innovation. And I think that's the value. For me, the predominant value of what the private sector brings to our work as governments and indeed as development partners around the world. So I think it's very, very important that we start small. And again, Africa Code Week is a perfect example of that. You start small, you develop really powerful examples of what's possible, proof of concept very, very early on, and then scale up on a gradual basis. So building trust between governments and the private sector, again, is crucial. And in the earlier stages of developing that trust, we need to, I would argue, we need to see a higher risk allocation to governments in the first generation of PPPs. That can provide a lot of advantages and go a long way ultimately in unlocking the flow of private funds into PPPs once that trust is established, once lenders and the private sector can develop enough comfort with the PPP environment of a particular country. We also need to emphasize the need for a better classification of the different PPP models, not only focusing on the specific legal and institutional issues that are essential to getting these PPPs off the ground, but also on viability. Again, that's critical to attracting private investors. And again, that does sometimes need additional government funding and a focus also on the creditworthiness of national utilities. So for me, ultimately, the key aspects of a successful PPP need to include 5 things. First of all, identifying what level of expertise, resources, and capacity each partner is able to bring to the table. Putting in place agreements which ensure sustainable, inclusive development outcomes. That's critical. Number 3 is a well-designed structure or mechanism for securing funding for the project, leveraging all the experience, all the expertise, and all the investment of the private sector. Fourthly, incorporating lessons learned from those earlier iterations, those earlier proof of concepts that can be somehow then scaled up to our national, or in the case of Africa Code Week, to a continental level. And finally then, an agreed level of risk sharing that incentivizes private sector engagement on an ongoing basis. So there for me are the key elements from a government's perspective of what needs to be put in place for those successful partnerships to thrive and survive in the future.
Thank you very much, Kieran, for your answer to this question. And if I may have a second question. So can we say that there is a holistic vision of development in Africa combining purpose and impact, especially when we think about empowering communities?
I think we can. If you look at how Africa itself, and I think that's exceptionally important in how we approach all of the challenges that we collectively are working to address in Africa. If we look at Africa's own vision for itself as a continent, for its people, and I think that's best embodied in Agenda 2063, the Africa We Want, which is a wonderful document, and for me embodies the vision of the whole of Africa in terms of how it's going to develop. In 2013, African heads of state, they signed a very solemn declaration marking the continent's ambition to become an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa, and that being driven all the time by its own citizens, representing ultimately a very dynamic Africa in 2063 and delivering in the international arena. And if you look at the top two priorities in that agenda, in Agenda 2063, they are, and both of them, I would argue, are inextricably linked to one another. First of all, the top priority is delivering a high standard of living and quality of life for all of its citizens. And secondly, to have well-educated citizens with a skills revolution focused on science, technology, and innovation. So if you're setting out to achieve these two ambitions, you have to start at the level of communities and empowering those communities through education. And that for me is the magic of Africa Code Week. It initially drills right down into individual communities, into individual schools, and then having achieved that proof of concept at local level, it then engages with ministries for education, with governments in rolling out the concept across the whole of the continent. And finally, if you look at how Ireland is developing its relationship with Africa. We just published our Africa strategy in November of last year. And again, at the heart of that strategy for Ireland as a country is working in a spirit of true partnership with African countries to achieve that vision by 2063. And we are seeing really encouraging business links developing now between Africa and Ireland in both directions. We have the Ireland-Africa Economic Forum that takes place every autumn here in Ireland. Excuse the dog in the background. And that's been really productive in terms of forging business links between Ireland and Africa. And if you look at the foreword of our country's Africa strategy, published last November, as I say, from our president, Michael D. Higgins, these words for me embody how Ireland sees its relationship developing with Africa when he said, Africa has the potential to be the continent of promise and opportunity in our 21st century. It will carry the hopes, the dreams, and the ambitions of our shared planet. And that, for me, is something certainly worth working towards.
Many thanks, Kieran, for allowing to understand better government position.
And excuse my wonderful dog in the background joining in the chorus.
And also many thanks for concluding with the wise words of a very wise man. I'm a huge fan of President Michael D. Higgins. Dear Kathy, so from your perspective, how did leading with purpose turn out to be a business vision for SAP?
So thank you, Clay. And in the spirit of saying, excuse me, I just like to declare that we are experiencing a magnificent electric thunderstorm in the Highveld in Johannesburg. And we are so incredibly grateful for the rain, because it is indeed one of our most precious resources is water on the continent. So every now and again, you will hear a bit of a clap of thunder and lightning as we have this conversation. But talking about leading with purpose, and from an SAP perspective, I can perhaps share that having a conversation with an associate of one of our founding members, SAP was, of course, developed or created just under 50 years ago. And from the beginning of time, purpose has always been part of the fabric of our organization. Today, we talk about our purpose being to help the world run better and to improve people's lives. And that has really gone from being a traditional corporate social investment activity to being a fundamentally strategic imperative within our organization. And we talk about it as leadership. If we think about what's happening to business in the current era, where digital transformation and access to information is so pervasive, more and more we find that society is so enlightened that they're no longer willing to work for organizations that are just focused on the top and bottom line. For organizations to be truly relevant, purpose has to be core to what the organization does. So in SAP, our purpose is absolutely front and center of everything we do. And it's about not only what we contribute to society, in fact, to the environment, but it's about what we as employees participate in. And I truly believe that leaders who do not have purpose in their portfolio, if they do not have it as an imperative in what they do on a day-to-day basis, they will struggle to compete in this very different and competitive environment that we are existing in. So leadership with purpose undoubtedly is a critical element of business, and it is something that we live and breathe within SAP.
Merci, Kathy. We do have a second question for you. Would you please share with the audience what is the current status of the Africa Code Week PPP agreement?
Well, the Africa Code Week PPP agreement is really one of our flagship partnerships, I think, that we have on the continent and definitely within SAP. If I think back to the experiences and the impact that Africa Code Week has had on the continent, it fills me not only with joy and pride, but I mean, it's really special for me because my background is in application development. And I have seen in my own career what impact learning coding has had on my life and my career. And when I see the opportunity that we give into the millions of youngsters across the continent to understand at least the framework of coding, I think that what is being given is quite priceless. And that will help youngsters not just to understand the basics of application development or what we require in the IT industry, but whether they end up staying in the industry or going to do something very different, we're creating an opportunity for youngsters to understand things in a very structured manner, to leverage the ability to think creatively, to develop the skill around listening. All of these skills really are fundamental to creating not just IT professionals of the future, but citizens for every country going into the future. And you know, none of this would have been possible without the amazing partnerships that we've had, ranging from government through to social enterprises. The collaboration and the way we've worked together has truly been the beauty of the success of Africa Code Week. So if you want to ask me what the status is today, it is absolutely a magnificent, shining example of how if we all come together to do good, to do something that is bigger than every single one of us, then this collaboration around this PPP is a wonderful example of what we have achieved on the continent.
Thank you so much.
Can I just say something there, Claire, if you don't mind? Yeah.
Please, yes, of course.
Kathy, I couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. I think this generation, the generation, my son's generation, have a far deeper sense of their global citizenship than we ever had. And I think an awful lot of those young people who are ultimately finding their way into the ICT industry are anxious to see those skills being used to solve all of the problems of the world, not just purely in a narrow technical focus. I recall visiting a tech innovation hub in Dar es Salaam about 3 years ago, full of young coders, all in their early 20s, all from Tanzania, that general region. And they were using, without exception, every one of them using their technical and digital skills to solve societal issues that were cropping up within their own region. So I couldn't agree more, Kathy, couldn't agree more.
It's such a wonderful sharing that you've just done, Karen, because just this morning we were looking at some strategic investments we wanted to make in our business for 2021. And the team went away to do the work around what ideas they put to the table. 50% of the ideas were about sustainability and solving issues on the continent, whether it was around plastic or around the last mile of creating awareness around the ethics around production and manufacturing. The ideas were all about what do we need to do as responsible citizens in our business. It is undoubtedly a critical element of business and of course of our every society on the continent for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. And we'll actually come back to you really soon as Alice, who's our social media millennial, and she's organizing this webinar logistic in the background. She has identified a couple of questions from the audience. And Kathy, you may want to answer the first one. Provided that the impact evolves, to become a business value by 2030, to what extent will it change the face of business interactions?
Sorry, Claire, would you mind just repeating the question for me?
Yes,
again?
sorry, it might be my accent, so I will try my best. So, provided that impact evolves to become a business value by 2030. So if we consider impact or purpose as a business value by 2030, to what extent will it change the face of business interactions? And I'm pretty sure you've already tackled the answer in a way, right? Because you said that leading with purpose was so important.
Yes, absolutely. I think that as we see purpose and impact becoming more and more core in every organization, I think across the planet, what I see happening going into the future is we will, first of all, if we think about inclusion, we will see that representation in organizations will much better reflect the societies in which they operate. And that would include things like gender diversity, race, culture, etc. So that will be the first massive change that I expect will happen from an impact point of view. I think as well that the big change will be around how businesses operate in a more ethical and transparent manner, because the level of consciousness and accountability will be much higher, and that will be a significant change. And the way we use technology to enable that will be the amazing opportunity that we see going into the future. So just as two examples of what I think could change quite significantly. And finally, I think the way businesses procure and the way they drive, what I believe is fundamentally exciting about purpose and impact is that when we start looking at our procurement approach strategies, it will not just be about the biggest and the best, or perhaps the best price in terms of who you procure with, but including more social enterprises in your procurement strategy will become the name of the game. And the impact of that for me is that we'll start to address issues around unemployment. We will start to have more variety and a richness of being able to make our organizations grow, whether it's from a skills development point of view or procuring just traditional products, etc. We'll be able to, I think, open up the opportunity for more and more participation. And so the drive towards inclusion will be a fundamental change that organizations have, and the benefits, I think, will just, they will resound across society. So just a few examples of how I think things are changing by 2020, 30, maybe even earlier if we do it right.
Hopefully, hopefully. So for the second question from the audience, collaboration is our only viable option. How would you instill this notion in the young generation? And I would hand over whether to Albert, whether to Kieran.
Or both.
Kieran, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, it can start.
Yeah. To be frank, Claire, my response to that is we need to learn from their generation. And
yes, most probably.
We have nothing, I would argue, little to teach the young people about collaboration. They are collaborators by their very nature. You know, I had my 12-year-old nephew with me here last night in my home just after dinner. He was doing some research for his homework that he had left until Sunday evening, which seems to be a problem for him. But he was collaborating with a friend in France and a friend in Italy on researching the Second World War and the implications of the war and how it affected society back there at the time. So for him, it is absolutely second nature to hop on his phone and to collaborate with a friend in France and a friend in Italy. And, you know, that is the power of what's possible in the future in terms of these collaborations. And as I say, that generation has that distinctly heightened sense of a global citizenship and a global responsibility. So I think if we just allow them the opportunity to collaborate, give them the tools to collaborate, keep investing particularly in digital technology and rolling out whatever options are there in terms of broadband fiber or satellite or whatever it may be, so that these collaborations can continue. And that all we have to do then is sit back and nurture that sense of global connectivity and global togetherness, and the young people will do the rest. They've got all the talent to do exactly that.
Merci. Albert, would you like to comment?
I think he really tried to say it all. My two things are, first of all, he mentioned about digital technology. I think technology is helping. It's a really enhancing collaboration, and particularly for these young people. The second is also the language. You know, there is now more a conducive environment for young people to learn more languages so that to be able to communicate. And communication is so important today. I'm impressed to see my young daughter. She's 11. She's now studying Spanish, German. You know, she already speaks French and English. So all these are really very important elements that will facilitate the collaboration that we expect. And of course, so importantly, when we give them challenges to work together, I think that's also another equally important aspect that we need to consider. Thank you.
Merci, cher Albert. So thank you very much to everyone. With Mr. Chuching, Honorable Albert, Honorable Kieran, and Mrs. Kathy Smith, we had the pleasure of hearing the insights on PPP from eminent members of a truly inspiring and successful public-private partnership. With the current pandemic changing the way of educating, we need to educate or access to the young generation. It was not only symbolic, but also important that we selected the United Nations World Teachers' Day to launch the Africa Code Week initiative across the African continent. Indeed, with the theme being teachers, leading in crisis, reimagining the future. Obviously, this year's celebrations take place in a world completely changed by the COVID-19 pandemic, and Africa Code Week made no exception, as we had to entirely reimagine the strategy, shifting to a virtual one. We developed an app, an Africa Code Week app, as Mr. Chuching said and reminded. We did it to ensure most children and teachers would access the training material that was developed by Brendan Smith from the Africa Code Week, but also, speaking of collaboration, code.org, UNESCO, and the MIT Foundation. Then we launched an African Code competition challenge for children and youth aged 8 to 16 to participate and submit Scratch Games ideas through a 2-minute video on the theme, how will your tech change the future of education? And as we speak, this challenge is currently being implemented by all the Africa Code Week ambassadors across Africa. And we expanded Africa Code Week from 37 to 53 countries in Africa. 53 because actually Egypt is participating to another program called Digital Skills for Today. So I wanted to thank our panelists, Mr. Chinchu, Honorable Albert, Honorable Kieran, my dear colleague Kathy. You are a role model for me. All the Africa Code Week ambassadors, as they are the teachers in the field engaging children in coding workshops. UNESCO, Irish Aid, ADEA, BMZ and GIZ, the various ministries across Africa, and also a very special mention to the Ministry of Education in Morocco, because they set up a task force in 2 days and they helped translating all the training material of Africa Code Week into Arabic. And of course, 1,000 thanks to the Africa Code Week core team. Please allow me to tell their names: Adi, Adam, Alice, Bernard, Brandon, Claire, another Claire from the communications team, Dorsaf, Fatim, Ibi, Ibrahim, Jérôme, and Sunil, and of course to our audience today. Kathy, over to you to conclude.
Thank you so much, Claire. And perhaps I should just start by acknowledging that today is World Teachers Day, and to express our extreme gratitude to the teachers of our world. I think that listening to many of the parents, because I have much grown-up children, but many of the parents that I've spoken to over the last few months have absolutely acknowledged the incredible role that teachers play in the world today. And we often just take this for granted, and just to acknowledge that, you know, we celebrate in the day today, but actually we thank you for every single one of the days that you've invested in children that are not your children and have given them the gift of learning. So really a huge happy Happy Teachers Day today to everybody. Secondly, is just to say a huge thank you to all our partners for their commitment, their unwavering support over the last few years. This has, of course, grown into a hugely successful initiative. Africa Code Week, as I said earlier, is our flagship initiative in SAP Africa. And none of this would have been possible without your support. We talked earlier about collaboration, and you know, collaboration, it has been and is the recipe for success for this initiative. And perhaps I can just end by saying the gift of teaching young kids to code is a gift that will last them and will endure for decades to come. I cannot tell you how critically important it is that we continue this drive, because the future of our continent, which is so desperately in need of engaging more actively into this digital explosion that's happening, and the opportunity for us to really embrace this and to take advantage of the fact that we have one of the most precious resources in the world on our continent, and that is our youth. And if we make this investment in our youth today, I can see Africa just going from strength to strength in the future. So thank you very much, everybody. And I wish us a magnificent Africa Code Week in 2020.
Merci. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thanks a lot and wish you well.
Merci Albert, merci Sharon, merci Cathy.
Thank you, merci, au revoir.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.